White principal took black maid's child, but she came back, wearing a lawyer's badge. What happens when a school principal takes a black child under temporary custody just because he thinks he can? He had no idea who was coming for him, or what her badge would say when she walked into that courtroom. Janice Brooks wasn't a saint, not by any stretch, but if there was a person in that town who understood what it meant to be a good woman, to carry the weight of the world on her back without ever asking for a thank you, well, it was her. She cleaned the hallways of Elmview Elementary like they were her own kitchen floor. 3 jobs, aching knees, no pity parties. She didn't beg, didn't whine, didn't waste her breath cursing the sky, even though life had given her every reason to. Folks didn't call her by name. Miss Brooks if they were feeling generous, but most days it was just hey or custodian, and more often they walked right past like the logo on her janitor's shirt turned her invisible. Funny how some uniforms do that, cloak you in silence. Then came that Monday, that cursed, overcast, bone-chilling Monday that started with drizzle and ended with betrayal. She was scrubbing gum off the tiles by the locker hall, the kind of sticky mess no kid ever confessed to. Her gloves were damp, the mop bucket sloshed with more soap than water, and her mind was already on her daughter Alice, waiting at home with cold cereal and multiplication flashcards. That's when she saw her, a tiny thing, no older than 7, curled up on the hallway bench like a crumpled flower petal, pink sweater, white ribbon in her braids, sneakers too clean to belong to any child who played at recess. She sat alone, arms tight around her knees, staring at the ground like the floor had answers she couldn't find. Janice stopped, took off her gloves. She'd seen this child before. Jaylena, Miss Hudson's quiet little girl from 2nd grade, always polite, always whispering thank you after lunch. "Baby girl," Janice asked gently, "why you sitting here all by yourself?" The girl sniffled. "Mama didn't come. She was supposed to pick me up." Lord, that school had emptied out 20 minutes ago. Teachers gone, kids gone, even Principal McCallow likely back home in his suede recliner, watching the news he thought only mattered to him. "Well, come on, sweetheart," Janice said, extending a hand. "You can't be out here all alone. I got a warm cocoa with your name on it. But shh, don't tell nobody. It'll be our little secret." They walked together to the lounge. Janice fished $1 from her coat and coaxed the vending machine into giving up a lukewarm cup of sugar and chocolate. She wrapped the girl in her spare shawl, itchy but clean, and set her up with a cartoon on her phone. And in that moment, something rare happened. The world got softer. Not for long. 10 minutes later, Miss Hudson burst in, hair wild, eyes frantic, and froze at the sight of her daughter laughing, swaddled in Janice's shawl, sipping cocoa like life had always been kind. I was stuck in traffic," Hudson stammered, guilt etched deep into her face. "No harm done," Janice said with a warm nod. "I wasn't about to leave this angel out in the cold." But this was the moment, the split second that might have passed in a movie montage, backgrounded by swelling strings. Only this wasn't fiction. This was real life, and real life don't have a soundtrack, just consequences. The next morning, no note, no courtesy call, just a sharp voice on the intercom. "Janice Brooks, report to the principal's office, immediately." Principal Brett McCallow, 40-something, proudly white, with a flag pin stuck to his lapel and a haircut that screamed 1985, sat at his desk without looking up, flipping through papers like they were more important than any human in the room. "You violated protocol," he said flatly. "You were alone with a student, no certified supervisor present. That's against school policy." Janice didn't flinch. "She was crying, sir. Alone. Her mama hadn't come. I gave her cocoa and comfort. That's all." He finally looked up, and when he did, his eyes held that particular kind of cold that only power can afford. "That's not your role," he snapped. "You are not a teacher, not trained, not authorized." Right, she didn't have a certificate that said licensed in compassion. She was trained in MOPS, not mercy. The nerve. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, but with that rehearsed casual venom, "Also, your daughter was seen on campus after school hours. Unaccompanied. That's a safety issue." He pressed a button on his phone. A woman entered. Gray suit, clipped voice, a clipboard held like a shield. No hello, no smile. "This is Ms. Carter from Family Services. We've received a report. We're obligated to act." Janice straightened. "A report? From who?" "Anonymous," Carter replied, "but credible. It appears your daughter was on school grounds without supervision. That could be considered a potential endangerment." Janice's mind roared, like a freight train with no brakes. But she said nothing. She knew better. Rage would only play into their script. Dignity was her armor now. She was in the janitor's room, my room, doing homework. I didn't hide her. Everyone saw her. That's not sufficient, McCallow said. The matter has already been referred to Child Protective Services. Your daughter will be placed in temporary custody until the situation is resolved. And just like that, the oxygen left the room. Ms. Carter added, dry as chalk, the transfer will happen this evening. You'll be notified about visitation options. Transfer. Like her child was a package on a delivery route. When they left the room, Janice stood still, a statue of resistance. On the outside, stone. But inside, her soul cracked. Slowly, quietly, like glass under pressure. That night they came. A man and woman in plain coats with gentle voices and brittle smiles, like they'd practiced empathy in front of a mirror. Miss Brooks, it's standard procedure, just until we verify everything. She crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. Alice, baby, you just go with them tonight. I'll see you soon, I promise. I don't want to go, Mama. I know, baby, I know. She didn't cry. Not in front of Alice. Not ever. She closed the door. Only then did her body collapse against it. 3 days later, the official document arrived. In neat, heartless print, it read, Temporary Custodian, Brett McCallow. The same man who reported her. The same man who judged her unfit. The same man who thought kindness was a mistake. And now he had her child. And Janice? She wasn't done. She was just getting started. Janice Brooks awoke at 4:47 a.m., not to an alarm clock, but to a silence that screamed louder than any siren. Alice was no longer beside her. There was no faint tap of slippers on hardwood. No soft creak of the fridge as her daughter fetched an apple for breakfast. Just a winter-cold emptiness. And the wall calendar taped near the bed. Each day crossed out in red ink, mocking the slow passage of tortured time. It had been 7 days. 7 days since her daughter was temporarily placed into custody of Brett McCallow's family. 7 nights of tossing and staring at the ceiling, as if the plaster held secrets. How could a person so brazenly take what isn't theirs and still believe they did right? Yes, temporarily. Like a cough that won't go away because you refuse to get treatment, and truths left untreated can lead to infection. And this system, Janice knew, was already riddled with decay, especially when you're a black woman with no money, no privilege, no badge, only the audacity to think for yourself. Social media was silent. School parents' gatherings were silent. Not one white parent raised a hand. Not one coworker stepped forward to say, this is wrong. Only hushed voices in the staff lounge. You keep going, Chan. And a plain envelope from the mail carrier. You're strong. Keep fighting. So Janice fought. She enrolled in evening hours at a legal aid library, leaving after long shifts to absorb statutes and case files about temporary custody laws, school district protocols, and then, deep into the darkest corners, disciplinary reports and privilege logs. What she discovered was bone-chilling. Miss Cairns, the white teacher's assistant, regularly brought her own child into school, leaving him in the classroom while she helped grade papers. No reprimand. Mr. Wayne, the custodian, let his nephew play in the gym after hours. Nothing flagged. Yet Janice gave cocoa to a child at risk, and instantly she was deemed a threat. When she laid that evidence in front of a local legal aid attorney, he scratched his head and said quietly, "You've uncovered a strong case, but you need a lawyer." Janice just looked at him. "What if I become one?" He laughed at first, thinking it was witty banter, but then he saw the look in her eyes, the hollow strength, and his smile faded. So Janice applied for an accelerated certification program for public interest attorneys. They looked for lived experience, some formal education, and a fire inside that wouldn't die. She checked every box: experience, grit, and raging fire. On the second week, when she filed her first court motion to challenge custody status, school officials called. "Janice," said the secretary with syrup-sweet tones, "the principal would like to speak to you about settling this matter quietly." Settle, as if you settle a transaction, not a kidnapping. She walked into his office. No smiles, no apologies, no bows. McCallow sat behind a polished desk, folding his fingers like a prayer sign, looking down his nose as if she were a broken parking meter he wanted to scold. "Look," he began, voice smooth, rehearsed. "I'm moral. I'm reasonable. I understand your feelings, but your daughter has structure, proper meals, a tutor for music." "We're in a cage," Janice interrupted, her voice low and steady. "You describe a cage, not a home. You took her because you had the power, not because she needed it." He shifted, soft sigh, as though exasperated with a persistent fly. "That's not fair," Janice cut him off. "It's not opinion, it's fact. CPS responded to your referral, and I will prove it." Silence stretched until he spoke. tone weary, dismissive. Janice, you're a woman from the street. I hold a license. I make decisions. The system is built on people like me, and ladies like you get consumed. That was the moment. Truth whispered itself in his words. Not a threat, just cold description. What he didn't know, Janice had already filed the appeal. She'd met with volunteer lawyers who coached her on declarations and affidavits, called community groups where children had vanished after temporary custody and never returned. And most important, she had started the accreditation process. That mugshot badge she'd ordered would soon read in bold block letters, lawyer. So a week later, the courthouse called with a court date, Judge Harper, known to detest self-appointed vigilantes. On the day before, Janice set out her borrowed blue blouse, iron-pressed, black folder filled with affidavits, teacher declarations waiting to sign, plus a sticky note from Alice, a little doodle of mother and daughter with a scrawled message. Mom, I miss you. I know you'll get me back. By God, Janice whispered at the note. I'm not just coming, I'm bringing her home. No excuses. On the morning of court, she walked into that building with steps you don't see on a former custodian. This was a woman who had been silent for too long, and she wasn't staying silent another minute. That's where the climax builds. Everything you've been waiting for is about to shift. Stay with her. You can't afford to miss how she flips the script. When Janice Brooks crossed the threshold of the courtroom, the click-click of her heels echoed like hammers of reckoning, each strike resonating through the marble floor and into the hearts of everyone present, signaling that she carried more than a folder. She bore a dossier on a hypocritical system where respect is reserved for those whose neckties cost more than a month's rent. And if anyone thought she arrived to beg, they were sorely mistaken in their address. Judge Harper, a methodical, pedantic white man in his 60s, whose face suggested retirement dreams not of golf, but of absolute silence and the luxury of not hearing anyone raise their rights, momentarily lifted his gaze from his stack of papers as Janice approached the bench with firm resolve and radiant composure. Miss Brooks, will you be representing yourself? He asked, voice controlled but unsoftened by surprise. She nodded once smoothly and pulled from her folder a new badge that caught the overhead light like a spotlight on her fingernails, bold and immaculate. Attorney at law, Janice M. Brooks. I am a licensed attorney, Your Honor, and I represent Ms. Janice Brooks in this child custody matter, she announced. This petition seeks full restoration of custody and rejection of the false report submitted by Principal McCallow. For a beat, maybe two, the judge stared at her, not out of disbelief that she had taken up legal arms, but perhaps to digest that someone once dismissed as school staff had stormed into his court with documents that smelled not of fear, but of gasoline, and with rhetoric ready to ignite them. The district attorney's counsel, a white man in a tailored suit, expression, I studied at Yale so I don't debate with women in a $20 blouse, leapt up with indignation. Your Honor, this looks theatrical, more spectacle than substance. Janice let that roll off her like water on oil, then replied with poised intensity, then you haven't seen Act 1. Her confidence dripped with every syllable. It was as if she had been cultivating that moment her entire life, showing up not to kneel, but to stand. She laid out evidence in precise order. A compact flash drive containing video footage of Jaylena crying alone in the hall, followed by the scene of Janice comforting her. No unsanctioned contact, no misbehavior, just a woman acting with kindness in a place where kindness is a liability. Next came printouts of school correspondence, naming numerous white staff members whose children had free access to school grounds after hours, yet faced no disciplinary action. 0 reports, 0 flags. And yet Janice's single act of compassion triggered a system-wide alert. Then one by one, witnesses rose to speak. Colleagues, parents, and at length, a mother whose second-grade daughter adored Janice. She stood tall, looked Judge Harper in the eye and said, my daughter never had anyone like Miss Janice. She's the one who met her when she cried over a bad grade. The principal? He couldn't tell you her name if you paid him. The room stilled. Even the judge's lips twitched upward. But the emotional crescendo happened when Janice withdrew one final sealed envelope. She placed it on the bench with quiet conviction. This is my complaint before the Teacher Ethics Committee, she explained. It documents that Mr. Brett McCallow unilaterally appointed himself temporary guardian, without court authorization, without notifying me, without any psychological assessment of suitability. At that, Principal McCallow turned pale. That's a lie. He stood, voice shaking. I acted on the advice of Child Protective Services. The child exhibited signs of distress, symptoms that demanded intervention. Symptoms? Janice leaned forward, intensity sharpened. Her distress was born from being ripped from her home, entrusted to strangers who frightened her, and dressing that trauma up as better conditions. You aren't a clinician, Brett, but your director's judgment was enough to seize a child. Are you a school administrator or a collector of other people's families? A murmur spread across the gallery. The judge pounded his gavel softly, warning the room to lower voices. The DA sat stunned, unable to mount a response. The walls seemed to lean in, as if straining to hear truth that had, until now, been spoken in whispers. Finally, Judge Harper raised his gavel. "Sufficient," he declared sternly. "Ms. Brooks, you have presented serious grounds for a custodial review. I order an evidentiary hearing regarding CPS and Principal McCallow's conduct. Until then, temporary custody shall be restored to you." An uncomfortable silence followed, like the air escaping from a deflating balloon, and then a handful of staff and parents began to clap. Quiet, heartfelt applause rooted in respect, not performance. At that moment, a social worker, seated toward the front, leaned down to Alice, who had been sitting quietly on her lap, and whispered something. Before the child registered what was happening, she leapt out of her seat with a sharpened gasp. "Mama!" Janice's arms were already sweeping around her daughter midair, and she wept, not from fear any longer, but from relief so deep that tears were gratitude made visible. When it was over, as Janice gathered her things, the courtroom felt changed. The air was denser, heavier with acknowledgement. People avoided eye contact with McCallow. The district attorney shuffled papers, brow creased, expressions unreadable. Journalists scribbled notes, their pens capturing a moment of reckoning. And as mother and daughter exited together, arm in arm, they cast a silhouette that needed no caption. Truth in motion. Janice's mind raced, but she didn't speak. She just held Alice close, noticing how small she felt against her chest, and how fiercely she would guard that smallness from being stolen again. On the steps outside, the press moved in. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters called her name. "Ms. Brooks, what now?" She paused, blinked, then straightened her spine and smiled. A smile that carried fury, compassion, and unchained resolve. "I'm going home to make sure my child gets dinner," she said. "Then I'm going to work, because whatever comes next, this isn't over." In the days that followed, her courtroom appearance became more than news. It became a community beacon. Mothers who had felt powerless began reaching out, asking how to read the notices, how to file the forms. Community centers invited her to speak. Activists approached with strategy ideas. Local media headlined, "Custodian turned champion, how Janice Brooks stood up to the system." But Janice remained intentional. She didn't seek fame. She taught evening clinics on parental rights, helped people collect documentation, coached them on self-representation, and navigated them through systems that previously had smothered dissent with bureaucracy. The school board launched a formal review of Principal McCallow's conduct. His abrupt demotion and eventual removal became a case study in bias and misuse of power. The ethics complaint she filed gained traction at regional levels. Policies that once shielded abuses behind closed doors began to surface into daylight. Meanwhile, at home, life regained normal rhythms. Dinner around the table. Alice's laughter filling up rooms that had once echoed emptiness. Janice traced her daughter's homework with proud eyes and held her tight at bedtime. And every now and then, the sticky note from Alice would reappear, tucked inside Janice's folder or pinned to the fridge. "Thank you for fighting." Janice didn't need to say anything. She just knew, because she had shown. When hearts are loud enough and minds determined enough, even the quiet shadows of injustice can't hide. Brett McCallow walked into Elmview Elementary that Wednesday morning the same way he had for the last 15 years. Chin slightly lifted, chest puffed just enough to suggest dignity without arrogance, or so he thought. And with a latte in his left hand, no sugar because power in his world was best served bitter. His tie was tight, his steps precise, and in his mind played that old worn-out anthem of entitlement. You're white, you're the boss, you're untouchable. But when he tapped his ID card at the access terminal that morning, the machine didn't bow like it usually did. Beep. Access denied. He stared, blinked once, tapped again. Same sound, same red flash. McCallow chuckled under his breath. System glitch, he muttered, already turning toward the security guard station, like a man too busy for inconvenience. Hey, John, you'll let me in, right? Probably just the mainframe hiccuping. But John, the same black guard who had greeted him every morning for a decade with forced civility and careful yes sirs, didn't smile today, didn't salute, didn't call him Mr. McCallow. Instead, he said, flat and unblinking, You need to go to the conference room. The board's waiting. And just like that, the symphony inside Brett's head stuttered. The air thinned. His footsteps faltered. Though he tried to hide it, he turned slowly, one hand still gripping the paper coffee cup like a shield. The hallway to the conference room had never seemed that long before. Inside, they were already seated, three people who didn't flinch when he entered. At the head, Gloria Daniels, chairwoman of the school board, a woman with courtroom eyes and a voice that had humbled more than one overpaid administrator. Her charcoal suit had sharper lines than Brett's jaw, and her stare didn't blink. To her left, Luis Ortega, county counsel, a young, sharp-eyed Latino attorney who used to carry case files for people like Brett. Now he sat, legs crossed, lips curled in something between irony and confirmation. And beside him, Anthony Wills, a father from the parent committee, a mechanic by trade, fighter by necessity, who once fixed school buses and now fixed broken narratives at PTA meetings. "Sit down," Gloria said. Not a suggestion. Brett did. And the second he lowered himself into that leather chair, he realized something profound. That voice he had used for years to give orders, shut down debates, deflect accountability, sounded different now. Smaller, hollow. It didn't echo in this room like it had in his office. Gloria opened a folder, thin but lethal. "We've reviewed the evidence submitted by attorney Janice Brooks," she began, her tone neutral but her delivery razor sharp. "We've also conducted an internal review. The findings are, to put it generously, unfavorable." Brett straightened, rage bubbling under a facade of professionalism. "This is retaliation. She's trying to destroy my career because she couldn't beat the system." Luis didn't flinch. He just leaned forward. "No," he said with finality. "You destroyed your own career. She just turned on the light." Then came the data, line after line. Brett's disciplinary decisions over the years. Who got punished, who didn't. How minority students were referred to the district 5 times more than white students under his tenure. How employees of color filed complaints that disappeared in filing cabinets. And then, the final nail, his unilateral assumption of custody without legal process. "You appointed yourself guardian," Gloria said, eyes narrowing. "You did that without court order, without CPS protocol, without due process. That's not just unethical, Mr. McCallow. That's actionable." Silence. Then she added, voice even lower, "We recommend immediate removal. We'll also be forwarding this to the State Education Board and Licensing Committee. You may resign quietly or face formal proceedings." And in that second, Brett wasn't the principal anymore. He wasn't the man with the keys. He wasn't the system. He was its symptom, a relic of unchecked power that finally met the mirror. He stood, no more words, no rebuttal, just a nod, and he left. Not through the front doors, but through the side exit near the boiler room, the one reserved for deliveries and for those being returned. Across town, the sun had crept through the kitchen window of a small apartment, warming the walls and casting soft light across a paper-strewn table. Janice Brooks stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, her hands in soapy water. Behind her, Alice was coloring. Markers spread like rainbows, drawing a figure with big eyes and a badge. A newspaper sat beside the cup of cooling tea. Its headline read, "From Janitor to Justice, How Janice Brooks Held a Principal Accountable and Changed the System." But Janice didn't smile at that. She didn't need headlines. She only needed the quiet sound of Alice humming, the smell of morning, and the knowledge that her daughter was home, and home for good. "Mama," Alice asked, waving the drawing. "Yes, baby? Are you really a lawyer now?" Janice turned, drying her hands on a towel. "Yeah, sweet pea. But not just a lawyer. I'm someone who learned how to speak the system's language and make it listen." And that's what she did in the weeks that followed. Not with speeches or parades, but step by step. First, she gave free legal workshops in her neighborhood, explaining parents' rights, what to do when CPS knocks, how to read court documents without fear. Then came the support groups, Black mothers whose children had been taken temporarily and never returned. She gave them tools, words, strength. At one meeting, standing before 15 women with tired eyes and hopeful hands, she said, "They trained us to stay silent, to believe our grief was too complicated to explain. But silence doesn't protect you. It just makes your suffering comfortable for others. It's time we made it uncomfortable." They called her brave, inspirational, a hero. She refused those titles because what she wanted wasn't a plaque or a podium. She wanted results. She wanted a world where no Black mother stood at the threshold of her own home and heard a stranger say, "Your child has been placed in a safer environment." Because safety isn't a picket fence and a golden retriever named Lucky. Safety is a mother who loves you, protects you, and knows how to fight. And one Friday, as Alice came home with a cardboard project in her backpack, Janice smiled. "What's that?" Alice pulled out a tiny paper doll, wearing a blue blazer and holding a sign. "It's our classroom project," she said proudly. "We had to make a hero." "I made you," Janice blinked. "Why me?" "Because you're not afraid, not even of people who think they're always right." Janice hugged her tight, eyes closed, voice steady. "You remember that, baby. The people who shout the loudest about being right are usually the ones most afraid of being questioned." Alice nodded, and as they cleaned up the table, folded laundry, and prepared for a weekend without lawyers, hearings, or headlines, Janice felt something deeper than victory. She felt peace, because she hadn't just brought her daughter home. She had brought her voice home, and the next time someone tried to speak over her, they'd have to learn the language of truth, and it just so happened she was fluent.